The parking garage exhaust, mixed with antiseptic smell from the hospital ventilation, creating a smell Warren Harrington would never forget. January evening, ice patches on concrete. His Mercedes idling, heated leather seats doing nothing to warm the cold spreading through his chest. 2 hours ago, he'd stood in the hospital gala ballroom announcing a $2 million donation. Cameras flashing, champagne bubbling, the kind of evening where money felt like power. Now his 6-year-old son was screaming. Miles clawed at the bandages covering his eyes, his small body thrashing in the recovery room chair. The darkness is louder now, he kept saying, over and over, the words barely intelligible between sobs. Louder, louder, louder. 3 photographers in the lobby. Someone had tipped them off about the billionaire's miracle surgery. Flash after flash reflecting off the hospital glass. Warren tried to shield Miles, dropped his keys, couldn't think past the animal sound of his child's terror. Grace Hayes, the housekeeper, rushed past him. She knelt beside Miles and did something Warren didn't understand. She clicked her tongue, twice, soft and rhythmic. Miles's head turned toward the sound, away from his father's voice, toward hers. Grace pulled a worn spiral notebook from her bag as Dr. Cross emerged, already talking to the press about normal post-surgical adjustment. Warren watched his son's head track another sound, the elevator ding 40 feet away, with the precision of a compass finding north. Why would fixing his eyes make the darkness scream? The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Monitor beeps filled the silence between Miles's ragged breathing. Warren stood by the window while Dr. Vivian Cross removed the surgical bandages with practiced efficiency, her iPad propped on the counter, post-op checklist glowing. Pupil response normal, she said, checking a box. Sutures clean, no infection markers. Miles recoiled when the overhead light hit his face. His hands flew up, not to cover his eyes, but pressed against his ears. Light sensitivity is expected, Dr. Cross said. She reached toward Miles without warning. He thrashed, knocked the iPad off the counter. The crash made him scream again. Warren moved forward. Miles, it's okay. It's Dad. I'm right here. He tried to put his arms around his son. Miles fought him like Warren was a stranger, small fists hitting his chest. That animal sound again, wordless and desperate. The door opened. Grace entered carrying a plastic cup of water, and she stopped immediately when she saw the situation. She set the cup down carefully, the sound distinct, intentional, and said in a voice that carried no panic, Miles, honey, it's Grace. I'm walking to your left side now. I'm going to touch your shoulder. She moved slowly, narrated each step. My hand is coming up. You'll feel it in 3, 2, 1. Her dark fingers rested on his shoulder. Miles stopped fighting. His breathing slowed. He didn't relax completely, but the panic left his body. Warren felt something crack in his chest. Dr. Cross made a note on her phone. Reflexive response to familiar voice patterns, nothing diagnostic. She looked at Grace with the expression wealthy people use when the help oversteps. Mrs. Hayes, family only during medical assessments. Grace's jaw tightened, but she nodded. As she stepped back, Warren saw her pull that spiral notebook from her cardigan pocket. She wrote something quickly, her handwriting small and precise. Dr. Cross noticed. Mrs. Hayes, anecdotal observations aren't medical data. No, ma'am. Grace's voice was neutral, but her pen didn't stop moving. Warren watched his son. Miles's head was tilted now, turned slightly toward the hallway. A food cart rattled past the door, 60 feet away at least, and Miles tracked the sound with his whole body, his face following the movement he couldn't see. Is that normal? Warren asked. The way he's turning toward sounds? Dr. Cross glanced up. Compensatory behavior. When one sense is impaired, others heighten. Basic neurology. She finished her checklist and closed her iPad case. The surgery was successful, Mr. Harrington. His post-operative distress is within normal parameters. Some children take longer to adjust to visual correction than others. Give it time. How much time? 6 to 8 weeks for full adjustment. I'll see him again in 2 weeks. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Mr. Harrington, I'd recommend limiting household staff interaction during the recovery period. Too much stimulation from non-family members can confuse the adjustment process. She left. The antiseptic smell lingered. Warren looked at Grace. She was closing her notebook, but not before he saw the entry. Post-op day 1, rejects unpredicted touch, orients to sound location, not voice content. Surgical site clean but sensory response worse than pre-op baseline. Grace? He said. What does that mean, worse than baseline? She hesitated. 15 years working for the Harrington family had taught her when to speak and when to stay invisible. I just mean he seems more upset now than before the surgery, sir. But I'm not a doctor. But you've been with him since he was born. Yes, sir. Miles made a small clicking sound with his tongue. Unconscious, automatic. Then he did it again, turning his head slightly, as if listening to something Warren couldn't hear. Grace noticed. Warren saw her notice. What is it? He asked. Nothing, sir. Just, he's done that before. The clicking. I've been meaning to mention it in my notes, but... Your notes. How long have you been keeping notes? 3 years, sir. Since he turned 3 and the doctor started saying the blindness might be permanent. I thought maybe patterns would help, but like Dr. Cross said, it's just anecdotal. Warren wanted to ask more, but Margaret, his assistant, appeared in the doorway with his coat and phone. Sir, the car is ready. We should leave before the press regroups in the lobby. They got Miles home. Grace rode in the back seat, narrating everything. We're turning left now. We're going up the driveway. You'll feel the car stop in 3, 2, 1. Miles stayed calm as long as she kept talking. 3 days later, Warren sat in his study at midnight. Marble desk, late-night bourbon, rain on the windows, a stack of medical bills spread in front of him. $127,000 for the surgery, $43,000 for pre-op imaging, $19,000 for specialist consultations, and on top of the stack, the letter from the insurance company. Claim denied, procedure deemed experimental, insufficient clinical evidence for cortical visual impairment treatment, appeal window, 90 days from date of procedure. Warren read it 3 times. Cortical visual impairment. That wasn't Miles's diagnosis. Miles had been diagnosed with optic nerve deficiency, ocular blindness. That's what they'd operated on. He called the billing coordinator, got transferred twice, finally reached a woman whose voice sounded like she'd explained this 1,000 times. Mr. Harrington, the claim was submitted under CPT code for cortical treatment because that's what the surgical notes indicate, but your insurance doesn't cover experimental cortical procedures. You have 90 days from the surgery date to submit an appeal with supporting documentation. What supporting documentation? Medical evidence that the procedure was necessary and appropriate for the diagnosed condition. Warren hung up, did the math. Surgery was January 3rd. 90 days meant April 5th. 90 days to prove a doctor with 30 years of credentials had used the wrong diagnosis code, or prove she'd operated on the wrong condition entirely. Margaret knocked, entered with coffee. Sir, the housekeeper's daughter called. Grace mentioned Miles might visit their apartment this weekend. Sienna asked if... No, Warren cut her off. Miles needs rest, not playdates. Margaret nodded and left. Warren touched the framed photograph on his desk. His wife, Ellen, holding infant Miles. She'd died in childbirth. 6 years of Warren trying to do everything right, everything she would have wanted, and his son still lived in darkness. She would know what to do, he thought. She always knew. The bourbon burned, the rain drummed. Somewhere in the East Wing, Miles was probably clicking his tongue in his sleep, mapping a world Warren couldn't see. 90 days. The timer had already started ticking. The hospital cafeteria smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. 12 days after the surgery. Dr. Vivian Cross sat at a corner table, reviewing Miles Harrington's file on her tablet, her salad untouched. Dr. Rajesh Patel approached with his lunch tray. He was younger than Cross by 15 years, still on fellowship, still careful about which conversations to have and which to avoid. May I? He asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Cross nodded without looking up. The cafeteria noise surrounded them, trays clattering, conversation hum, the coffee machine hissing in the corner. Patel ate a sandwich for a moment, then said, I saw the Harrington case notes. The post-surgical response is unusual. Cross's fingers stopped scrolling. Unusual how? The sensory escalation. Most ocular blindness patients show improvement or stability after corrective surgery, but his auditory hypersensitivity increased, and the motor response to unpredicted touch, that's typically associated with post-traumatic stress from the surgical experience, Cross interrupted, which resolves with time. Patel set his sandwich down. He'd reviewed the imaging 3 times. The optic nerve development looked normal to him, not deficient. Dr. Cross, has anyone considered cortical visual impairment testing? The pattern fits better, brain processing rather than eye structure. The air between them changed. Cross closed her tablet. The imaging was conclusive, Dr. Patel. His optic nerves showed developmental deficiency. I'm looking at the same scans. I'm not seeing... The PR director appeared at their table, interrupting. young woman with a clipboard and an expression that meant crisis management. Dr. Cross, the press is asking about the Harrington boys' incident in the lobby last week. Do we have a statement? Cross's posture straightened. Standard recovery process. Some children take longer to adjust than others. The surgery was successful. Any continued distress is behavioral, not physiological. The PR director made notes. Perfect. I'll send that out. She left. Cross turned back to Patel. Her voice was quieter now, but something hard lived underneath it. Dr. Patel, the Harrington case is complex. Multiple specialists consulted. The diagnosis was thorough. I'm not questioning the thoroughness. I'm suggesting we might be looking at the wrong system. If it's cortical, we don't need to confuse the family with alternative theories. Cross stood, gathering her things, especially theories that would require admitting the surgery addressed the wrong condition. Patel felt his fellowship renewal sitting in the silence between them. Cross picked up her tablet. I'd like to discuss your case assignments privately. My office. 2:00. She walked away. Her heels clicked on the linoleum. The sound echoed long after she disappeared down the hallway. Patel sat alone at the table. He looked at Miles's file still open on his phone. The post-surgical worsening wasn't just unusual. It was predictable. If you operated on eyes that weren't the problem, you'd add trauma without adding function. You'd make a child who was already compensating work harder to compensate for new pain. He closed the file slowly. His hand trembled slightly. At 2:00, Cross's office, leather chairs, awards on the wall, the smell of her perfume, sterile and floral. Dr. Patel. She didn't invite him to sit. Your fellowship renewal is up in March, 4 weeks. Yes, ma'am. I've been reviewing your performance. Overall strong, but I've noticed a tendency toward diagnostic speculation, suggesting alternative interpretations before gathering full evidence. Patel's mouth went dry. In medicine, we follow protocols. We trust established methodologies. We don't muddy diagnostic waters with theories that could undermine patient confidence or institutional credibility. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. I need team members who understand that. Do you understand that? The distant PA system announced a code blue in another wing. I understand, Patel said. Good. Then we won't have any issues with your renewal. He left her office. Took the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed to move. 4 flights down. By the time he reached the parking level, he'd made his decision. Silence was safer than truth. 5 days later, Grace's apartment, evening. The kitchen table was stacked with bills. Electric, water, bus pass renewal. Sienna sat across from her mother doing homework, the sound of her pencil scratching paper mixing with the bus brakes hissing outside the window. Grace's phone rang. Warren Harrington's name on the screen. She answered. Mr. Harrington? His voice was formal, uncomfortable. Mrs. Hayes, I wanted to discuss Miles's care schedule. Grace set down the bill she'd been reviewing. Is something wrong? Not wrong, exactly. His therapists recommend limiting stimulation during the adjustment period. Dr. Cross feels... He paused. She feels it might be best if your visits were less frequent, perhaps supervised, official. Grace's voice stayed steady, but Sienna looked up from her homework at her mother's expression. Mr. Harrington, with respect, I've known Miles since the day he was born. I've documented every behavioral change, every response pattern. I have 3 years of... I'm sure you mean well. Warren's tone had that edge wealthy people use when they're being polite while dismissing you. But the medical team feels that perhaps too many different caregivers are confusing his recovery process. It's nothing personal. It never is, Grace said quietly. I'll have Margaret coordinate any future visits through the official therapy schedule. Thank you for understanding. He hung up. Grace sat holding the phone. The kitchen timer ticked. Sienna's pencil had stopped moving. Mama? Sienna's voice was small. What does that mean? Before Grace could answer, her voicemail notification sounded. She put the phone on speaker. This is Amanda Chen from Child Protective Services. We're scheduling a home environment evaluation for Miles Harrington. This is standard procedure when there are concerns about a child's care needs exceeding available resources. Please call to coordinate access. Thank you. The message ended. Sienna stared at her mother. Mama, they can't... Grace stood up slowly. She walked to the cabinet above the refrigerator and pulled down 3 spiral notebooks, 2022, 2023, 2024. She spread them across the kitchen table, pushing bills aside. When rich people can't fix something, Grace said, her voice carrying a fury Sienna had never heard before, they blame the help. Sienna placed her hand on top of the notebooks, pages and pages of her mother's careful handwriting, observations, patterns, 3 years of seeing what doctors wouldn't look at. Then we make them listen, Mama. Sienna's voice was steady, 12 years old and already understanding how the world worked. I know how. The January sun was cold and white over the Harrington estate. 22 days after the surgery, bare trees, wind cutting across the stone patio where Miles sat in his sensory therapy chair, wrapped in a blanket. Margaret had allowed the visit after Grace called 3 times, supervised, 30 minutes, maximum. Sienna stood in the garden doorway, her backpack over one shoulder, watching Miles from a distance. He wasn't moving. His face was turned toward nothing in particular. His hands rested in his lap, fingers still. Margaret watched from the window inside. She'd been with the Harrington family almost as long as Grace. She'd seen the way Warren had changed after Ellen died, the way he'd tried to fix everything with money and couldn't understand why it didn't work. Sienna walked slowly across the patio. She made each footstep deliberate, letting the sound announce her approach. Hi, Miles, she said. It's Sienna. I'm sitting down next to you now, okay? No response, but she hadn't expected one. She lowered herself to the cold stone, cross-legged, her worn jacket not quite warm enough for the wind. She pulled out her homework, math problems she'd already finished on the bus, and started talking through them out loud just to make sound. So, if you have 12 apples and you give away 5, that's 7 left. But that's boring. I think the real question is, why would you give away 5 apples? Maybe you're making friends. Maybe that's what apples are for. Miles didn't turn toward her voice. But when she dropped her backpack, the thud of it hitting stone, his head snapped toward the sound. Sienna froze, watched him. His face was pointed exactly at where her backpack had landed, 3 feet to her left. She tested it, clicked her tongue. Once, twice. Miles's head turned toward her face. She waited 5 seconds, moved to a different position, clicked again. He followed the sound. Inside the window, Margaret's hand went to her mouth. Sienna created a rhythm. Click, click, pause, click, like a code, like a language. Miles's lips parted. He made a small clicking sound back. Mimicry or response, Sienna couldn't tell. But it was intentional. She pulled off her gloves and reached for his hand slowly, narrating like her mother did. Miles, I'm going to touch your hand now. You'll feel it in 3, 2, 1. She guided his fingers to different surfaces. The stone patio, tap, tap, tap. The metal chair leg, ting, ting, ting. The wooden armrest, thud, thud, thud. Each surface made a different sound when clicked. Each sound echoed differently. Miles's face changed. Not a smile exactly, but the permanent blankness that had been there since the surgery cracked slightly. His fingers explored the sounds with her. He was listening to the echoes, mapping them. You're hearing shapes, aren't you? Sienna whispered. That's how you see. Margaret disappeared from the window. 30 seconds later, gravel crunched under expensive shoes. Warren Harrington approached across the garden, his coat unbuttoned, his face showing something between hope and fear. Sienna looked up. Mr. Harrington, I didn't mean to... Don't stop, Warren said quietly. He lowered himself to a crouch, ignoring the cold stone under his knees. What are you doing? Listening to him. Sienna took Miles's hand again and tapped it against the chair. He's not just blind, sir. He's echolocating, like bats, like dolphins. He's clicking and listening to how sound bounces back. Warren watched his son's fingers move against the metal, testing the sound. How do you know this? Because my mama's been writing about it for 2 years. She just didn't have the word for it. Sienna pulled her phone from her pocket, cracked screen, 3 years old, and showed Warren a library website she'd pulled up on the bus. I looked it up. It's called echolocation. Blind people can learn it, but Miles already knows it. He taught himself. Warren's throat tightened. He watched Miles click against the wooden armrest, his small face focused in a way Warren hadn't seen since before the surgery. Why didn't anyone tell me this was possible? Sienna looked at him with 12-year-old directness. Maybe nobody asked him how he sees. They just decided he couldn't. The wind picked up. Miles clicked his tongue 3 times, turning his head slightly as if tracking the way wind moved through the bare branches. Warren stood slowly. Sienna, can you come back tomorrow? If my mama says yes. I'll call her myself. He stopped. I need to see her notebooks. That evening, Warren sat at his marble desk. Grace stood across from him, her 3 spiral notebooks held against her chest like armor. Margaret had offered her a chair. Warren had nodded permission, a small thing, but Grace noticed. "Mrs. Hayes," Warren said, "the notebooks you keep, may I see them?" Grace hesitated. 3 years of observations that doctors had called anecdotal, that Dr. Cross had dismissed as non-medical. She set them on the desk carefully. Warren opened the 2023 notebook. His hands shook slightly. He read entries aloud, his voice quiet in the large study. March 2023. Miles more calm when I describe my actions before touching. August 2023. Responds to rhythmic sounds, timer, metronome, more than voice alone. January 2024. Post-surgery, pulls away from surprise touch, seeks echo-rich spaces, bathroom, stairwell, garage. He looked up at Grace. The leather chair creaked under him. The hallway clock ticked in the silence. "You've been documenting sound orientation for 2 years, before the surgery even happened." "I'm not a doctor, Mr. Harrington." Grace's voice was careful. "But I've been with Miles every day. I see what I see." "You see my son?" Warren's voice cracked. "I've been looking at diagnoses." He pulled out the insurance letter, the appeal deadline, 90 days, now down to 71. "I need medical evidence, not anecdotes. But these patterns," he touched the notebooks like they were sacred texts. "Could they help?" Grace stepped closer to the desk. "If you want evidence, let me take Miles for evaluation. There's a city clinic that works with deaf children. They train echolocation. It's not expensive, but it's not covered by insurance either." Warren didn't hesitate. "Do it, whatever it costs. It's $2,400 for comprehensive testing. I'll write a check right now." Grace shook her head. "That's kind, sir, but if this is going to mean something, if we're going to challenge Dr. Cross's diagnosis, it needs to be independent, not funded by you. Otherwise they'll say you bought the results you wanted." Warren stared at her. This woman who cleaned his floors and pressed his shirts, who understood institutional credibility better than his lawyers did. "Then how—" "I have savings," Grace said quietly. The distance between them shifted. Warren gathered the notebooks carefully, as if afraid they might disappear. "Grace." He used her first name for the first time in 15 years. "Why didn't I ask to see these 3 years ago?" She met his eyes. "Because I'm the housekeeper, Mr. Harrington, and housekeepers don't diagnose." Grace gathered her notebooks slowly, as if afraid permission might evaporate. 3 years of seeing Mr. Harrington. 3 years you could have asked. The city clinic smelled like old linoleum and coffee that had been sitting too long. 31 days after the surgery, February cold. Grace and Sienna sat with Miles in the waiting room, surrounded by community health posters and donated toys. Dr. Angela Foster came out to meet them. Middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and worn sneakers. She knelt in front of Miles's chair. "So this is Miles," she said warmly. "Grace tells me you've got quite the ear." Miles didn't respond, but his head tilted slightly toward her voice. Dr. Foster stood. "Let's go see what you can do." The testing room was small. Worn carpet, fluorescent hum, equipment that looked functional but not expensive. Dr. Foster placed objects around the room at different angles, a brass bell, a wooden block, a metal bowl. "Miles, I'm going to make some sounds. You tell me where they are, or point, or walk to them, however you want." She rang the bell. Clear tone that sustained for 3 seconds. Miles's arm lifted, pointed directly at the bell without hesitation. Dr. Foster moved to a different position, tapped the wooden block, hollow thunk. Miles stood from his chair, walked around the table, didn't touch it, adjusted his path like he knew it was there, and reached toward the sound. His fingers found the block. Sienna watched, her hand covering her mouth. Dr. Foster picked up the metal bowl, struck it with a pencil. The ring sustained, echoing slightly off the walls. Miles navigated past a chair, around Dr. Foster herself, and located the bowl on the windowsill. He touched it, and the vibration traveled up his fingers. He smiled. First real smile since the surgery. Dr. Foster looked at Grace. "How long has he been doing this?" "Since he was 3, maybe earlier. I started noticing it when he was 2, the clicking, the way he'd map rooms with sound. But nobody—" Grace's voice caught. "Nobody asked me what I was seeing." Dr. Foster pulled up Miles's medical file on her computer. She read silently, her expression shifting. His neurologist diagnosed ocular blindness, optic nerve deficiency. She scrolled through the surgical notes. They operated on his eyes. Yes, ma'am. But his eyes are structurally normal. Dr. Foster highlighted a section of the imaging report. The optic nerves are fine. They're not deficient, they're transmitting signals. The fluorescent light buzzed. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner office. Then why can't he see? Sienna asked. Dr. Foster turned to face them. Because sight happens in the brain, not the eyes. The eyes are just cameras. The brain is what develops the pictures. And she pulled up a diagram. This is cortical visual impairment, CVI. The visual cortex, this area here, can't process the signals the eyes send. So even though his eyes work perfectly, his brain can't translate the information into images. Grace leaned forward. His neurologist dismissed that, said the imaging ruled it out. CVI doesn't always show up on standard imaging. It's diagnosed behaviorally, Dr. Ward. Foster looked at Miles, who was running his fingers along the wall, clicking softly, mapping the texture changes. And this echolocation, this is his brain compensating. He's processing spatial information through sound instead of light. It's not a miracle. It's neurology. Can it be fixed? Grace asked. It's not about fixing. It's about supporting how his brain actually works. Echolocation training, tactile mapping, environmental modification. She paused. But if you've already had surgery, it made things worse, Grace said quietly. He's more sensitive now, more afraid. Dr. Foster nodded. Because you operated on a system that wasn't broken. You added surgical trauma without addressing the actual processing disorder. She wrote something on her notepad. I'm recommending full CVI assessment, comprehensive testing. But I can't do it here. We're not equipped. You'd need University Medical, their neurodevelopmental center. How much? Grace asked. Foster checked her referral database. $20,400 for the full battery. Insurance doesn't typically cover it unless you have a neurologist's referral, which, she gestured at the file, you won't get from Dr. Cross. Grace's face didn't change, but Sienna saw her mother's hand tighten on her pursed strap. We'll find a way, Grace said. Dr. Foster handed her the referral. Grace, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it. Those notebooks you showed me, 3 years of behavioral observations, that's clinical-grade documentation. You tracked his echolocation development better than most researchers would. Don't let anyone tell you it's not medical evidence. Grace took the referral. Her savings account had 15 years of working 3 jobs, taking extra shifts, skipping things she wanted so Sienna could have what she needed. $2,400 would leave $5,000, or she could save the money and let Miles stay trapped in the wrong diagnosis. Thank you, Dr. Foster, Grace said. They took the bus home. Miles sat between Grace and Sienna, clicking softly, comfortable with the bus sounds because Grace had been narrating them for years. Engine rumble, brake hiss, turn signal tick, his map of the world. 4 days later, February 5th, morning light through Warren's study windows still cold, snow on the glass. Amanda Chen, from Child Protective Services, sat across from Warren with a clipboard and sympathetic eyes. She'd completed the home environment evaluation. Now came the report. Mr. Harrington, she said, I've assessed Miles's care situation thoroughly. Warren's hands were folded on his desk. Margaret stood by the door like a witness. Amanda read from her report. Miles presents complex needs, cortical processing deficits, sensory integration disorder. He requires specialized 24/7 care. She looked up. Your home environment, while financially adequate, lacks trained therapeutic staff. I'm recommending evaluation for residential facility placement. The words hit Warren like physical blows. Absolutely not. His voice was cold. I can hire any staff necessary. It's not about money, sir. It's about trained intervention. Amanda held up a letter. His neurologist agrees. Dr. Cross provided a supporting statement. Warren's jaw clenched. Dr. Cross recommended institutional care without consulting me? She consulted medical best practices, Mr. Harrington. Miles needs intensive therapy that can't be provided in a home setting. This is for his benefit. Warren reached for his phone, put it on speaker, dialed Dr. Cross. She answered on the second ring, professional, efficient. Warren, I assume this is about the CPS evaluation. Vivian, you recommended taking my son from his home? I recommended appropriate care placement. Warren, Miles needs therapy we can't provide in a residential setting. This is clinical judgment, not personal opinion. His benefit or your liability protection? The line went silent for 3 seconds. When Dr. Cross spoke again, her voice had edges. Careful. Questioning my clinical judgment publicly could be seen as defamatory. My reputation in this hospital's are beyond reproach. I'd hate for this to become a legal matter. The door opened. Grace entered with the clinic referral in her hand. Mr. Harrington, there's another option. Amanda saw her, made a note on her clipboard. Mrs. Hayes, I noted in my report that non-family caregivers, while well-intentioned, cannot substitute for clinical oversight. Grace stopped moving. I've raised this boy. You're the housekeeper. Legally, that's not a guardian relationship. Warren stood. Everyone leave, now. Amanda gathered her things. You have 30 days to contest this recommendation, Mr. Harrington. After that, we proceed with placement evaluation. She left. Dr. Cross disconnected without saying goodbye. Warren and Grace stood alone in his study. On the desk between them, the custody evaluation report and the clinic referral. One said, give up. One said, fight. The deadline for both was 30 days. The bank smelled like air conditioning and paperwork. 36 days after the surgery. February 7th. Afternoon light through smudged windows. Grace stood at the teller window. Sienna waited outside on the bench, backpack between her feet, watching her mother through the glass. The teller was young, probably her first job out of college. She pulled up Grace's account on her screen. You want to withdraw the full balance? Yes. That's $8,247.19. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Are you sure? Closing a savings account that's been open this long? I'm sure. The girl processed the transaction. The printer buzzed, spitting out the withdrawal slip. Grace signed it with the pen chained to the counter. Can you print the transaction history? Grace asked. All 15 years? The teller looked curious. Of course. May I ask what for? Grace folded the withdrawal slip carefully. Evidence that hard work has value even when it doesn't come with degrees. The printer hummed, page after page, 15 years of deposits, most of them small. $200 here, $180 there. Extra shifts at the Harrington estate, weekend work for 2 other families. Every entry represented hours of her life, traded for future security. The teller handed her the stack. Is everything okay? Grace looked at the pages, her whole adult life in numbers. Better than okay. I'm doing what's right. She took the cash, $8,200 bills, and the transaction history, put them in an envelope. The paper was crisp and new against her worn purse. Outside, Sienna stood when her mother emerged. Mama? I'm fine, baby. Grace's voice was steady. Come on, we've got a bus to catch. They walked to the stop, diesel smell, afternoon sun warm on their face despite the February cold. Sienna didn't ask questions until they were seated on the bus, watching the city pass. That was all your savings. It was. For Miles. Yes. Sienna was quiet for a moment. The bus brakes hissed at a red light. An old man got on, counting coins slowly for his fare. You're not his mama, Sienna said finally, but you love him like one. Grace looked at her daughter, 12 years old and already understanding things that took most people decades to learn. Blood doesn't make family, Sienna. Showing up does. The bus pulled away from the curb. Grace held the envelope against her chest. 15 years of her life, about to be bet on a boy who couldn't see her but knew her voice like his own heartbeat. 2 days later, February 9th, evening, Warren's office. Single desk lamp creating intimate lighting. The rest of the mansion was dark. Grace entered with the clinic referral and the bank envelope. Warren stood when he saw her, something he'd started doing in the past week. Small gesture, but it meant the distance between them was shifting. Mr. Harrington, I've scheduled Miles for CVI testing next week. Tuesday morning. The clinic needs a $2,400 deposit. Warren reached for his checkbook. Send me the invoice. Already paid. His hand stopped. Grace, where did you get? She placed the bank statement on his desk. The transaction history. 15 years in a single stack of paper. $8,247.19. 15 years working 3 jobs. I withdrew enough for the testing. Warren stared at the pages. Each entry, each deposit. He looked up at her face and saw something he'd been blind to for years. dignity, purpose. Love that didn't need a title or a contract. You spent your savings on my son? Our son, sir. Grace's voice didn't waver. I changed his diapers, taught him to drink from a cup, held him through nightmares. Money's different from job to job. Love isn't. Warren's throat closed. He pushed his chair back and stood. I'm going to reimburse every cent. That's not why I'm telling you what. Grace stepped closer to the desk. I'm telling you because those notebooks you finally looked at, they're worth more than any test. But tests give you ammunition. Ammunition for what? For fighting the people who want to put Miles in a facility because it's easier than admitting they were wrong. The lamp buzzed quietly. Distant traffic hummed through the window. Warren's watch ticked loud in the silence. Grace, if this goes to a hearing, custody, medical review, whatever it takes, will you testify? Officially? She met his eyes. I've been speaking for 3 years, Mr. Harrington. You're just starting to listen. Warren extended his hand. Not employer to employee, peer to peer, equal to equal. Then let me apologize for being deaf. Grace shook his hand. Her grip was firm. Her palm was rough from years of work he'd never thought about. Apology noted. Now, let's get to work. Margaret appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening, standing in the dark hallway, and something about the scene made her think, power just changed hands, and the man with billions didn't even notice. Warren pulled out legal pads, started making lists. We need everything documented, your notebooks, the clinic evaluation, the bank records proving independent funding. If Dr. Cross fights this, well, she will, Grace said. Then we need to be ready. Warren wrote furiously. We need a medical board hearing. We need to force an official review of Miles's diagnosis. We need Miles to show them, Grace interrupted. Not tell them, show them. Let him demonstrate echolocation. Let them see what 3 years of observation documented. Warren stopped writing, looked at her. You're right, he said quietly. Grace gathered the bank statement, folding it carefully. Mr. Harrington, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we challenge Dr. Cross publicly, I'll lose my job. Social services will say I overstepped. The hospital will blacklist me. I'll hire lawyers. I know you will. But I need you to know I'm doing this anyway, because Miles is worth more than my job security. Warren's eyes were wet. Why? Because someone has to. Grace turned toward the door, then paused. And because 6 years ago, your wife asked me to watch over him, right before she died. That promise doesn't have an expiration date. She left. The door closed softly. Warren sat in his study until midnight. Ellen's portrait watched him from the wall. He could almost hear her voice. Listen to the people who love him, Warren. Listen. He'd finally started listening. But would it be enough? The bus pulled away, carrying a woman who'd just bet 15 years of her life on proving that love counted more than credentials. The hospital press conference room smelled like stale air and ambition, 45 days after the surgery. February 16th, camera flashes popping like small explosions. Dr. Vivian Cross stood at the podium. Hospital logo backdrop, pressed suit, leather portfolio. Her perfume, sterile and floral, reached the first 3 rows. Recent questions about Miles Harrington's care require clarification. Her voice was measured, authoritative. We provided evidence-based treatment following comprehensive diagnostics. Every physician involved stands behind this approach. A journalist in the second row raised her hand. Dr. Cross, there are rumors the family is seeking alternative diagnoses. Cortical visual impairment? Cross's smile was practiced. Parents in grief often seek alternative explanations. It's understandable, completely human. But medical science must guide treatment, not parental hope. Another journalist. Is it true the housekeeper has been documenting behaviors that contradict your diagnosis? Anecdotal observations by non-medical staff, while well-intentioned, cannot override clinical expertise. Cross leaned forward slightly. We can't allow sentiment to replace science. I empathize with families who employ support staff who may feel emotionally involved, but lines must be maintained between care and credential. The words landed exactly as she'd intended. The journalists wrote them down. Across town, Warren watched the press conference on his phone. Margaret stood beside him in his study. When Cross said support staff, Warren's hand tightened around the phone so hard Margaret heard the case crack. She just called Grace a liar on national television, Warren said. Sir, we need legal counsel. This is reputational warfare. Warren set the phone down carefully. Get me Robert Chen, best litigation attorney in the state, and get me a private investigator. Sir? If Dr. Cross is willing to lie to the press, I want to know what else she's lying about. Margaret made the calls. 3 days later, February 19th, evening, rain drumming Warren's study windows, Jake Morrison entered carrying a laptop, ex-FBI, 53 years old, methodical, the kind of man who found truth in spreadsheets and email metadata. You wanted dirt, Jake said, opening his laptop on Warren's desk. I found a paper trail. Warren leaned forward. Margaret stood by the door, witness to whatever came next. Jake pulled up hospital cafeteria security footage. January 14th, 15 days after Miles's surgery, Dr. Cross and Dr. Patel discussed Miles's case. 3 people overheard Patel mention cortical visual impairment testing. So that same day, Jake pulled up an email. Dr. Cross sent this to the department head. Request Dr. Patel's fellowship review be moved up to February. Concerns about diagnostic methodology alignment. Warren read the email twice. She threatened his career? Within 24 hours of him questioning her diagnosis. Jake opened another file. Then there's this. Hospital billing records. Your son's surgery was submitted to insurance as medically necessary intervention for optic nerve deficiency. That specific language guaranteed approval. But if it was actually cortical, then the surgery was unnecessary. Hospital performed a $127,000 procedure that had zero chance of working because Dr. Cross either missed CVI or chose to ignore it. The rain intensified. Water streaked down the dark windows. Jake pulled up one more document. December 12th, 1 month before Miles's surgery, Dr. Cross submitted a grant proposal to the National Medical Research Foundation. Warren looked at the screen. The words blurred, then sharpened with terrible clarity. $2.3 million for innovative ocular blindness interventions, pending successful outcomes of Harrington case study. The room went silent except for rain and the laptop fan whirring. My son was a case study for her grant application? Your son was her proof of concept? If she admitted cortical blindness, her funding disappears. The grant specifically requires ocular condition success stories. Jake closed the laptop. This is motive, Mr. Harrington. This is evidence of suppression. Margaret's voice came from the doorway. This is what we bring to a medical board hearing. Warren stood and walked to the window, watched rain cascade down glass. Somewhere in the east wing, Miles was probably sleeping, clicking softly in his dreams, mapping worlds no one else could see. Can we subpoena Dr. Patel? Warren asked. Get him to testify about what she did? Jake shook his head. Not without a formal investigation. And right now, I'm just a PI you hired. No legal authority. You need someone inside the hospital to corroborate, someone willing to risk their career. He's terrified of her. Then you need to give him something more powerful than fear. Jake packed his laptop. You need to give him protection, legal guarantees, financial security if she destroys his fellowship. Warren turned from the window. Draw up a contract. Full fellowship funding independent of the hospital. Immigration lawyers if his visa is threatened. Ironclad protection. That'll cost... I don't care what it costs. Warren's voice was steel. Find him. Convince him. Whatever it takes. Jake left. Margaret remained. Sir, if we do this, if we go after Dr. Cross publicly, the hospital will fight back with everything they have. Warren picked up the grant proposal Jake had left. Miles's name in black and white. Clinical case study, subject 1A, ocular intervention, innovative approach, pending results. His son wasn't a patient to her. He was a line item, a funding justification, a career stepping stone. Let them fight, Warren said quietly. I've spent 6 years trying to fix my son with money. Turns out money only works if you're willing to use it as a weapon. Margaret nodded and left him alone. Warren looked at Ellen's portrait. Rain shadows moved across her painted face like tears. I'm ready to fight now, he whispered to her. I'm sorry it took me so long. The rain answered. The night deepened. Somewhere 3 miles away, Grace was probably sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing her notebooks, preparing to risk everything she'd built. And somewhere closer, Dr. Patel was lying awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a conscience that wouldn't let him sleep. The storm was coming, not the one outside, the one they were all about to walk into together. Warren looked at the grant proposal one more time, then locked it in his desk safe. Evidence, ammunition, truth. 3 in the morning, 52 days after the surgery, February 23rd. Warren sat alone in his study, third glass of bourbon. Rain had stopped, the silence was worse. He stood and walked to Ellen's portrait, oil painting. Her holding infant Miles. She'd died 6 hours after this was painted. Hemorrhage. The doctors said there was nothing they could have done. Warren had spent 6 years trying to prove them wrong through sheer force of money, hired the best specialists, bought the most advanced equipment, funded research, as if enough zeros in a bank account could rewrite the past. I hired the best doctors because you always said never cheap out on healthcare. His voice was hoarse, whiskey and exhaustion. But I forgot the other thing you said. Listen to the people who love him. The portrait didn't answer. It never did. Warren's hand touched the frame, canvas texture under his fingers. Grace tried to tell me, for 3 years, and I said let the professionals handle it. He laughed bitterly. Just like Dr. Cross told Dr. Patel to stay quiet. I'm the same as her, Ellen. I silenced the truth because it was inconvenient. The study clock ticked. His own heartbeat seemed louder than it should be. He walked to the connecting door, pushed it open quietly. Miles's room, nightlight casting soft shadows. The boy was asleep, but his lips were moving, making small clicking sounds, unconscious, automatic, echolocation in his dreams. Warren had never noticed before, never paid attention, too busy looking at medical charts to see his son. He returned to his study, pulled Grace's notebooks from the locked drawer where he'd been keeping them safe, opened the oldest one, 2022. Miles was 3. April 15th, 2022. Miles calmer when I click my tongue, thinks it's a game, but he always clicks back, like he's mapping me, like I only exist when I make sound. Warren read entry after entry, 3 years of Grace seeing what he'd been too proud to notice. She'd been documenting his son's language while Warren had been trying to force Miles to speak his. The bourbon glass sat empty. His phone showed 3:47 a.m. In 3 hours, Margaret would arrive. In 4 hours, he had a conference call with the board of his largest tech company. Numbers and projections and market share, none of it mattered. Warren picked up his phone, texted Margaret, schedule meeting with hospital medical board, formal complaint against Dr. Cross. I don't care about the money anymore. I care about the lie. He put the phone down, looked at Ellen's portrait one last time. How many years will I let pride steal from our son? The painted eyes seemed to answer, no more. 54 days after the surgery. February 25th. Evening. Hospital parking garage. Fluorescent lights buzzing. Car exhaust thick in the underground air. Warren waited by Dr. Patel's car. Margaret sat in Warren's SUV 30 feet away, engine idling, backup in case this went wrong. The elevator dinged. Dr. Patel emerged, medical bag over his shoulder, looking exhausted. He saw Warren and froze. Mr. Harrington, I can't talk to you without hospital counsel. Warren raised his hands, non-threatening. I'm not here to threaten, I'm here to beg. Patel looked toward the elevator, escape route, but his feet didn't move. Warren pulled out the PI report, held it up. January 14th. You mentioned cortical visual impairment. She buried it. My investigator has the timeline. The email to your department head, the fellowship review threat. Patel's face went pale. You don't understand. She controls my fellowship. My visa status depends on it. I have a family, so do I. Warren's voice cracked. And my son is living in the wrong diagnosis because you stayed quiet. I know. Patel's eyes filled. I know. Every day I see Miles's chart and He couldn't finish. The garage was cold. Concrete radiated February chill. Somewhere above them, the hospital continued its work, saving some people, failing others. Then testify, Warren said. Medical board hearing. I'll hire immigration lawyers for your visa. I'll fund your fellowship independently. Cover your family's expenses while you find a new position. Just tell the truth. Patel stared at the garage ceiling. Water stain patterns, pipes, infrastructure no one was supposed to see. If I do this, I lose my career here. If you don't, I lose my son. Warren stepped closer. Which one matters more? The question hung between them. A car drove past on the level above, tires on concrete. The sound echoed like judgment. Patel looked at Warren, really looked at him. Saw a father who'd finally stopped trying to buy solutions and started trying to earn them. Send me the hearing date. Patel's voice shook. I'll be there, but Mr. Harrington, I need it in writing. The visa protection, the fellowship funding, the family support, ironclad. You'll have a contract by morning. Patel unlocked his car. The beep echoed off concrete walls. He paused with his hand on the door. For what it's worth, Grace was right. Her notebooks are better diagnostics than our scans. He got in his car, started the engine. Diesel smell mixed with exhaust. He drove toward the exit ramp, taillights disappearing around the curve. Warren stood alone in the garage, fluorescent buzz, his own breathing, Margaret's engine still idling. He walked back to the SUV, got in. Margaret didn't ask questions, just drove. On the way out of the garage, they passed Dr. Cross's reserved parking spot, her luxury sedan gleaming under the lights, vanity plate, Healer 1. Warren looked at it and felt nothing but cold clarity. The truth had a price. Dr. Patel was about to pay it. So was Grace. So was Warren himself. But Miles had already paid too much. Dr. Patel drove away into February rain, carrying the weight of truth toward March light. The hospital administrative hearing room smelled like recycled air and consequence. 61 days after the surgery, March 4th, morning light through tall windows, the first warm sun they'd seen in weeks. Sienna wore her best dress. Grace had sewn patches on the elbows the night before. The girl knelt on the floor, arranging her demonstration carefully. Tactile map made of clay, fabric, and sandpaper, the Harrington estate in textures. Around it, an obstacle course, folding chair, potted plant, music stand. Warren watched her work. Sienna, you don't have to do this. I can hire expert witnesses. No disrespect, Mr. Harrington. Sienna didn't look up. Her fingers pressed clay into place. But Miles doesn't need experts. He needs someone who speaks his language. Grace arranged Miles's comfort items near the demonstration area, the smooth stone from the clinic, his textured blanket. She clicked her tongue softly, 2 beats, and Miles's head turned toward her from across the room. Margaret entered. They're ready, 5 board members, Dr. Cross and her counsel, and... She paused. Dr. Patel just arrived. Warren and Grace exchanged looks. He came. The hearing coordinator appeared in the doorway, clipboard, official posture. We'll begin in 5 minutes. Outside the room, press waited. Not many. This wasn't a trial, just an administrative review, but enough. Someone had leaked it. Probably Dr. Cross's team, hoping public pressure would make Warren back down. The door opened. The board members filed in first. 5 physicians ranging from their 40s to their 70s. Doctor. Sandra Morrison led them, chief of neurology, silver hair, eyes that had seen 30 years of medical politics. Then Dr. Cross, pressed suit, leather portfolio, her attorney beside her, young man with an expensive briefcase and practiced neutrality. Finally, Dr. Patel, wrinkled coat, manila folder. He didn't look at Dr. Cross, took a seat in the back. The room settled, recording equipment activated, red light blinking. Dr. Morrison spoke. Mr. Harrington, you've called this hearing to contest your son's diagnosis and treatment plan. Present your case. Warren stood. I defer to someone more qualified. He gestured toward Sienna. My housekeeper's daughter. Murmur in the room. Dr. Cross's attorney leaned forward. Cross herself smiled slightly, the smile of someone watching an opponent make a fatal mistake. Sienna stood, 12 years old in a patched dress. She met Dr. Morrison's eyes. Miles has cortical visual impairment. His eyes work. His brain processes visual information differently, so he developed echolocation. Dr. Cross spoke without being called on. With respect, this child is not medically trained. Noted. Dr. Morrison's voice was steel. Proceed, Sienna. Sienna lifted Grace's 3 notebooks. For 3 years, Grace Hayes documented Miles's sound orientation. Every entry, every pattern, these aren't anecdotes. They're data. A board member took the notebooks, opened the 2022 volume, read silently. His eyebrows rose. He passed it to the colleague beside him. These are remarkably detailed, the board member said. Consistent observations over 36 months. Now watch. Sienna clicked her tongue twice. Miles clicked back. Clear. Intentional. She moved to a different position. Clicked again. Miles turned toward her precisely. The room was silent except for breathing and the soft hum of recording equipment. Miles, navigate to the bell. Miles stood. Clicked his tongue. The sound bounced off walls, furniture, people. He walked forward. Around the folding chair, didn't touch it, adjusted his path like he knew it was there, past the potted plant, reached the music stand where the bell sat. His fingers found it, rang it. The clear tone filled the room. No one spoke. Miles smiled, genuine, joyful, and clicked twice more, mapping the applause he couldn't hear but could feel in the air vibration. Sienna's voice was quiet. He's not blind. You're deaf to how he sees. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Cross, do you contest this demonstration? Cross's attorney whispered to her. She shook her head slightly. Echolocation is real, but doesn't disprove ocular deficiency. The surgery was appropriate based on the... I need to speak. Dr. Patel stood in the back. The room turned. Dr. Patel, this isn't... Dr. Cross began. January 14th. His voice shook but held. I suggested cortical visual impairment testing. You silenced me, threatened my fellowship. The room erupted. Dr. Morrison banged her gavel, actual wooden gavel that made Miles click toward the sound. Dr. Patel opened his manila folder. Email chain, witness statements, timeline of suppression. He walked forward and handed the documents to Dr. Morrison. And this, Dr. Cross's grant proposal from December, $2.3 million for ocular blindness research. Miles Harrington listed as primary case study. Successful surgical intervention required for funding approval. Dr. Morrison read. Her face remained neutral, but Warren saw her grip tighten on the paper. Dr. Patel, she said carefully, you're testifying that Dr. Cross had financial incentive to maintain an ocular diagnosis despite evidence suggesting cortical processing disorder? Yes, ma'am. And I'm testifying that when I raised the possibility of CVI in January, I was threatened with fellowship termination. My visa status was implied to be at risk. I stayed silent to protect my career. His voice broke. I stayed silent, and Miles got surgery he didn't need. Surgery that made his sensory processing worse because we operated on the wrong system. Dr. Cross stood. This is defamation. I acted on the best available... Did you receive grant funding contingent on ocular blindness case outcomes? Dr. Morrison's question cut through the room. Silence. Dr. Cross, that's a yes or no question. Funding doesn't affect clinical judgment. That's not what I asked. The red recording light blinked. Every word preserved. Grace stood. No one had given her permission, but she stood anyway. May I speak? Dr. Morrison looked at her, saw something in Grace's face that commanded respect. You are? Grace Hayes. I've cared for Miles for 6 years. I'm not a doctor, but I know when someone is hurting, and I know when someone is listening. She pulled out the bank statement. 15 years of deposits. I spent my life savings getting him the test you should have ordered in January, not because I'm qualified, because I care more about being right than being respected. Dr. Cross's attorney stood. This is emotional manipulation. Warren stood. No, this is the truth you buried because it was expensive to your reputation. Dr. Morrison raised her hand. Silence fell. She looked at the evidence spread before her, the notebooks, the email chain, the grant proposal, the bank statement. Miles standing by the bell, still clicking softly, comfortable in his own language. This board will review all submitted evidence. Dr. Cross, you're suspended from Miles Harrington's care pending investigation. The emergency custody recommendation is vacated pending CVI appropriate evaluation. She looked at Grace. Mrs. Hayes, these notebooks will be retained as evidence. You'll be compensated for your time and expertise. Dr. Cross gathered her papers. Her attorney whispered urgently. She ignored him. As she passed Warren, she leaned close. You'll regret this. Warren met her eyes. No, I regret trusting you. She left, heels clicking on linoleum, the sound of retreat. Dr. Patel walked out first, unemployed but unburdened. Dr. Cross walked out last, employed but exposed. Between them, Miles clicked his way toward his father, navigating the obstacle course backward. Finding Warren by the sound of his breathing, the CVI clinic at University Medical smelled nothing like the hospital. Warm lighting instead of fluorescent. Textured walls. March 11th, 68 days after the surgery that never should have happened. Dr. Yuki Chen was 43, CVI specialist. She'd spent 15 years studying how brains process visual information. She knelt beside Miles, who sat on a cushioned mat exploring a textured ball. His visual cortex can't interpret the signals his eyes send, Dr. Chen explained, showing Warren and Grace the brain scans on her tablet. But look at this area, the auditory cortex. It's overdeveloped compared to typical sight-dependent children. He's been training himself in echolocation since infancy. Warren leaned forward. Could the surgery have helped? Dr. Chen's face softened. No. Ocular surgery addresses eye structure. Miles's eyes were never the problem. The surgery added trauma, heightened sensory sensitivity, made his existing coping mechanisms harder to use. She looked at Grace. Your documentation of his echolocation development is clinical-grade observation. You tracked it better than most researchers would. Grace's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Dr. Chin handed Warren a tablet showing a treatment plan. Echolocation training, tactile mapping, environmental modification. We can help him thrive in the world as it is, not force him to be something he's not. Sienna pulled out the clay map she'd made. Dr. Chen, Miles uses this to navigate Mr. Harrington's estate. Dr. Chen examined it, ran her fingers over the textures. Different fabric for different rooms. Sandpaper for stone paths. Smooth clay for marble floors. This is brilliant. Occupational therapy at its finest. She looked at Sienna. Have you considered medical school? Sienna laughed. I'm 12. Give it 10 years. We'll need you. Warren was quiet. He'd spent $890,000 on treatments that hurt his son. This woman was describing care that would help him for a fraction of that cost. Dr. Chen, I want to fund a CVI research center, full diagnostics, echolocation training, family support. He looked at Grace. Grace will consult. Sienna will be on the youth advisory board. Dr. Chen smiled. That would change countless lives, Mr. Harrington. Warren's voice was soft. It already changed mine. Miles ran his fingers over the tactile map, found the path from the gate to the garden. Home had a shape now. So did hope. 75 days. May 1st. Spring had fully arrived. Warren sat on a garden bench, reading news on his tablet. Cherry blossoms drifted past like late snow. The air smelled like flowers and fresh-cut grass. Dr. Vivian Cross resigns from Children's Hospital following medical board investigation. He read aloud. Hospital settles with Harrington family. Establishes Miles Harrington Center for Cortical Visual Impairment in child's name. Grace knelt nearby, weeding the flower bed. Her hands were in soil, by choice this time, not necessity. She deserved worse. She lost what she valued most, reputation. That's its own prison. Margaret emerged from the house with a folder. Sir, Dr. Patel's immigration lawyer called. His visa is approved. He's starting at Johns Hopkins CVI research program next month. Good. One honest doctor deserves a future. Miles stood at the edge of the garden, 7 years old now. He held Sienna's tactile map, the summer version she'd been working on with different flower textures added. Sienna sat cross-legged in the grass. Okay, Miles, find the fountain. Miles clicked his tongue, once, twice, 3 times in rhythm. He navigated the stone path, avoided the rosebush without hesitation. He knew its thorns made sound different, absorbed echoes instead of reflecting them, located the fountain by the water sound, dipped his hand in and laughed. The sound was pure joy. Warren's throat tightened. How long has he been doing this? 3 weeks. We practice every day. Sienna smiled. Yesterday he found his room from the kitchen by himself. Miles ran back, pressed the tactile map into Warren's hands, clicked at it, teaching his father the language he'd been speaking for years. You're showing me your world, Warren said quietly. Grace stood, brushing soil from her knees. That's how it should have been from the start. May afternoon, warm sun, birds singing. Miles turned his head, tracking their flight paths, mapping their movement through sound alone. Sienna picked up cherry blossoms from the grass, pressed them into a new map she was designing. Fall textures next, different leaves, temperature changes Miles could feel. Grace's kitchen timer dinged from the patio table. She'd brought lemonade. The timer that used to mark her shifts now marked Miles's victories, small sounds that meant progress. This timer used to measure my work hours, Grace said, pouring lemonade into glasses. Now it measures his freedom. Warren watched Miles echolocate between trees, navigate spaces, own the world on his terms. Ellen would be proud of him. Grace handed Warren a glass. She'd be proud of you, too, for finally listening. Miles clicked a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pause. 4, the pattern he'd been using since he was 3, his name and sound. Sienna clicked back. Same rhythm, their language, their friendship. Warren tried. His clicking was awkward, unpracticed. Miles laughed, forgiving, teaching. Clicked slowly so his father could learn. That's your first word in his language, Mr. Harrington, Grace said. Warren looked at her. Call me Warren. We're family now. Sienna helped Miles climb the fountain edge safely. He sat there clicking, listening to how water changed echoes, mapping the whole garden just by sound. The world existed for him in dimensions most people never noticed. Grace's notebooks, all 3 years, were archived now in the Miles Harrington Center Library. Invisible work made institutional, worth measured, respected. Dr. Cross's prescription pad sat in a hospital evidence box somewhere. Authority without wisdom, credentials without care. The tactile map evolved in Sienna's hands. Learning never stopped. Growing never stopped. Warren stood and walked to where Miles sat, knelt beside the fountain, put his hand on his son's shoulder, the touch Miles had been waiting 6 years to accept. "I'm sorry it took me so long to learn how you see," Warren said. Miles clicked twice, forgiveness an echo. He leaned against his father's chest. The garden was alive with sound. Water, wind, birds, cherry blossoms falling, Miles's clicking, Sienna's laughter, Grace humming while she worked. The darkness Miles was born into wasn't in his eyes. It was in the world's refusal to learn his light. That spring, one family learned. And the light spread. Let me tell you something about sight and seeing. Warren Harrington could buy anything money could reach. Technology, specialists, buildings with his name carved into stone. But when his son Miles was born, living in a world without visual light, Warren discovered the one thing wealth can't purchase: the humility to learn a language you didn't know existed. For 3 years, he hired experts who looked at brain scans and eye charts and shook their heads with practiced sympathy. Meanwhile, Grace Hayes, who cleaned his floors and pressed his shirts, was writing in spiral notebooks every night after her shift. Miles turns toward rhythmic sounds. Miles calms when I narrate my movements. Miles clicks his tongue and listens to the echoes. Nobody asked to see those notebooks because Grace was the help, and help doesn't diagnose. But here's what I learned from this story, and what I hope stays with you long after you've finished listening. Truth doesn't care about credentials. It cares about attention. Miles wasn't trapped in darkness. He was navigating it in a language the adults around him refused to learn, until a 12-year-old girl with clay under her fingernails sat down beside him and said, "Show me how you see." And he did. That's the thing about children. They don't carry the weight of professional ego or the fear of being wrong. Sienna didn't need a medical degree to notice Miles turn towards sounds like a compass finding north. She didn't need years of neurology to understand that if you describe your movements before you touch someone, they feel safe. She just paid attention. And love made her brave enough to speak what she saw. Dr. Cross learned the hard way that reputation built on silence crumbles when truth finds a microphone. She could have admitted her mistake in January, could have said, "I missed this, let's correct course." Instead, she protected her grants, her image, her untouchable 30-year career, and in doing so, she harmed a child who was already fighting to be understood. But Dr. Patel, he found his courage in a parking garage, lit by fluorescent hum and the weight of his own conscience. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you stayed quiet too long, then refuse to stay quiet anymore. By the time spring came, May sun warming the estate gardens, cherry blossoms falling like late snow, Miles was navigating the world on his own terms, not fixed, not cured, just understood. And that understanding gave him freedom. Grace's 15 years of overtime turned into a research center that will help thousands of children. Warren's billions, once wasted on wrong surgeries, now fund right training. Sienna's tactile maps are being replicated in CVI clinics nationwide. And Miles clicks his way through life, mapping sound, reading texture, seeing in ways most of us can't imagine. Sometimes the miracle isn't making someone normal. It's making the world learn their language. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The next time someone tells you they see the world differently, whether through echolocation, through notebooks no one asked to read, through courage that looks like defiance, don't ask them to change. Ask them to teach you. Because the real blindness isn't in the eyes. It's in the refusal to look. Spring came late for the Harrington family. But when it came, it brought light that didn't need eyes to be seen.